Some buildings deserve to disappear. This one wasn't one of them. For almost 30 years, this Japanese-inspired timber frame stood on the New England coast, surviving some of the harshest weather imaginable. Then one day, the owner was told it had to be removed. They had just 10 days. What happened next is one of the most remarkable building projects I've ever had the privilege of being a part of. At first glance, it's just another timber frame, but it isn't. This was Bensonwood's first Japanese-inspired timber frame, and the timber itself is unlike almost anything you'll find today. The entire structure was built from a maximum of 2 trees, and this wasn't wood that was felled for this project. It had come down in a storm and was then used for this house. Just look at these growth rings. We have 2 pieces of lumber here, a new one and the one from this house. The growth rings are very tight and you can't even detect a curvature. That means that this timber was cut from a section of the tree that was so far out. This tree had a huge diameter. Also, if you look across the timbers, there are almost no knots. This is the kind of lumber that's nearly impossible to find today. Even after decades of standing on the coast, the craftsmanship is still obvious. The problem wasn't the building itself, it had withstood the test of time. For nearly 30 years, it had stood against salty air, storms, wind, and everything the Atlantic Ocean could throw at it. The problem was the land beneath it. Year after year, the coastline kept disappearing. Neighbouring homes had already been demolished, some had even fallen into the ocean. Eventually, it became clear this house would face the same fate. Then one day, the owner received an offer on the property that he could not refuse. After years of worrying every time another storm rolled in, he decided it was finally time to let it go. But there was one problem. The buyer wanted the house gone, so the family asked, "Can we take it with us?" The answer was yes, but they had just 10 days, not 11, and I'm not joking. Not "we will see," 10 days and it needed to be gone. This wasn't just any other house. It had been home to generations of family memories. Locals even nicknamed the beach after it because its distinctive chimney was visible to surfers out on the water. They couldn't bear to watch it end up in a dumpster. So the race began. This wasn't a demolition though. Every beam had to be preserved. Every joint needed to be documented, and every timber had to be labeled properly. Any mistake they would make now would mean that it would be a lot more tricky and complicated to put it back together again later. The shoreline had eroded so close to the house that there wasn't even enough room to position a crane between the building and the beach. Everything had to come apart carefully, piece by piece, day after day. With just 1 day remaining, the new owner threatened to call the police if the house wasn't gone by the deadline. And this isn't drama, this is what the homeowner told me. Against all odds, they finished it just in time. Even though I wasn't part of the demolition crew, seeing how everything was documented was impressive. We used the original drawings to sort through the timbers on the first day. A timber frame like this is really one giant 3-dimensional puzzle. If one piece is wrong, and I'm not even just talking about the location, but even the way you turn it around, it may look the same way on one direction as the other, it won't fit. So every time one of these mortise and tenons didn't just perfectly slip in, we knew we very likely just needed to turn it around and then it would fit. Eventually, every timber made its way to Ontario. After years of back and forth with the local municipality to get a building permit, it was finally time. They had the permit and they were allowed to reinstall this timber frame. Now, the challenge wasn't taking it apart anymore, it was putting it back together. And over the years, memories had faded, the crew was now different, and we needed to figure out how do all these different pieces come back together. One day before the entire team arrived, we had to sort through all the timbers. We needed to know exactly where every piece was, otherwise we'd waste a lot of time once we started assembling the frame. You can also see that all the locations for the upright posts had already been marked out on the deck. Here you can see one of the great features of the frame, a tycho beam. It's a really nice feature in the main living room. It's a naturally curved beam that's basically being left in its natural shape. Then the team arrived, and they moved fast. My job was to allocate all the pieces and make sure they always had what they needed. Any hiccup could mean a bunch of people standing around waiting, so there wasn't much time for slacking off. There were also still some old pegs that had been cut off during the dismantling, and those had to be removed before we could put everything back together. Timber frames are usually installed in sections called bents. A bent is basically a flat cross-section of the building that's assembled lying down on the deck. Usually, when you think of a bent, you think of a cross-section through the building, posts, beams, and that distinctive roof triangle on top. But this frame was different. Here, the bents were actually ran longitudinally along the building. Each one was assembled on the deck in a predetermined order so that when we started raising them, nothing could be in the way. And because there wasn't enough room to lay them all out separately, we actually stacked them on top of each other. It took us one full day just to assemble all the bents. Each peg also had to be hammered in very carefully. These timbers had decades to dry out, so they were much more brittle than the timbers in a new frame. So you don't just beat the pegs in, you go slowly and listen. If you start hearing cracking sounds, you stop and figure out what's going on. Then on the second day, the crane arrived. It's always fun when cranes move in. Suddenly, the project turns into an adult-sized Lego set. Once the crane was set up, it was all hands on deck, and it wasn't long before the first bent went up. Everyone has to pay attention here because mistakes can turn into chaos pretty quickly. Safety is the highest priority when you're moving frames this heavy. Fingers can get pinched very easily, and uncontrolled movement of something this size can obviously do a lot more damage than that. Once the first bent was standing, we could start attaching the perpendicular beams that would connect it to the next bent. And that's the moment the building starts going from 2 dimensions into 3. I always find this part exciting because suddenly you're not looking at pieces anymore, you're starting to see the volume of the building. One particularly interesting moment came when we had to install this newel post for the stair railing. This was basically a big web of timbers that all had to fit together at the same time. Several timbers that were already installed and standing had to be loosened again just enough to allow this one post to slide into its pocket. This connection was designed by somebody who really knew what they were doing. The Japanese designer knew exactly how all of these pieces would interlock and also how many other timbers would be affected when this one piece went in. Once most of the bents were standing, we installed the floor joists for the upper floor. Sheets of plywood were laid over them so we had a working platform. Then the roof timbers started going in, and everything still fit. 2 large dormers had been pre-assembled down on the ground and were craned into place. It was important to rig them properly so they could come in at the right angle and hopefully just slip into place. Well, slip into place is relative. Here, we're persuading the dormer just a little bit. Did you hear that? That's the dopamine hit every timber framer is looking for. That's the sound of something finally dropping in and locking into place. Overall, it took 1 day to assemble all the bents without the crane, then 3 days with the crane to raise the main frame, and another day without the crane just using the zoom boom to erect the smaller ancillary frames. And by Friday, the entire timber frame was standing again after having been stored in a barn for years. The owner was very happy, and I think everybody involved felt the same way. It was a pretty great accomplishment to see this frame standing again. Projects like this remind me why I love building. Today, so much construction is dictated by speed and profit. Build it, just get it done with, and move on to the next one. This building was different though. Every joint had a purpose. Every piece had been carefully thought through by the master designers back in the late 80s. It wasn't designed to just last 30 years. It was designed to last generations. And that's a very different mindset. People often ask me, Why do I talk about building better? It's projects like this that are the reason. Not because every house should be a timber frame, far from it. Not because we should all build exactly the same way, but because there's something we can still learn from the people who built buildings meant to outlive themselves. This house was almost lost forever. Instead, it got a second life. And I think that's a story worth telling. Before I end this video, there's something I'd like to say. Thank you to the family that allowed me to be part of this crew. You didn't know me at the beginning, and there was lots of timber framers that wanted to be part of this project. Yet, for some reason, you gave me an opportunity to be part of this project. Working on this project allowed me to meet incredible craftsmen, build new friendships, and be able to learn from incredible experienced people that I respect in the industry. Thank you for giving this house a second life and giving me the opportunity to be part of a memory that I'll never forget.